Today I have a very special guest. This is Dr. Diane Kobrynowicz, and her and I have an incredible, amazing, synchronous meeting that we had a few weeks ago. And she is exactly the person that I've been praying I can introduce to you. She has a lot of wisdom to share for us as mothers and us as women. Dr. Kobrynowicz, thank you for being with us. Tell us a little bit about what you do and how you got started.
Wonderful. How did I get started? I bridged two cultures as a result of having been the daughter of immigrants. And so you can see the cultural influences that impact your life when you bridge two cultures. So I call it the brine.
The brine?
Yes. It's like we're all these pristine cucumbers and we go to live in a pickle jar. Well, what happens to a cucumber that lives in a pickle jar? It becomes a pickle. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times we think we're making our own choices and we don't realize that we're actually influenced by the culture around us.
Love it.
And having been the daughter of immigrants, I can bridge two cultures, or my parents did for sure. And I kind of grew up that way. So it's a little bit easier to see some of those cultural influences when your parents come from a different culture than the one that you're raised in. And I believe that this is the reason that led me to, one, have a strong stand for fairness, and then go to graduate school over 25 years ago to become a social justice scholar. So I was all about social justice, studying stereotyping and prejudice, discrimination, really as the founding or the foundation of what it really means to live a life on your own terms, to live a life of freedom. If you don't see the places that you're held back because of the brine, you don't realize the choices that you're making are influenced by things that might not be under your control.
Oh, I love it. It kind of reminds me of the reverse engineering that Malcolm Gladwell does in Outliers.
Yes, exactly. And Malcolm Gladwell, he's read so many of the people in my field. I always think he was a closet social psychologist.
He kind of is. I mean, if you think about it, the way that he gathers the research for his books is absolutely fascinating.
Yes.
I really admire him as an author. And so tell us where now you are directing your focus in terms of blessing the larger community, especially women, with your work.
Well, thank you. So I love that. That's my intention, is to be a blessing. So I went to graduate school and became a scientist because I thought if I could understand how these things worked and share that with people, they'd stop doing the things that caused unfairness. Yeah, does that work? Right? It doesn't work that way.
And well, you're the one doing the research.
Yeah, exactly. And it doesn't. And so I ended up leaving academia and ended up getting really well schooled in what I call the arts. And so first I studied the science and I studied the arts, or not necessarily making fine art, but in terms of the art of living. So I became trained ultimately in more than a dozen health, well-being, transformation technologies, the art of living well. So what I'm doing now is kind of alchemizing the best of what I know of science and the best of what I know of art and turning it into a way of helping people take these ideas so that they can live their dream come true lives on their own terms.
You're so uniquely qualified to speak to that because you've worn so many different hats. You have so many different superpowers, that encompass both the science and the spirituality of being true to ourselves and living in our truth and self-expression. What do you bring now specifically to women who are watching our program, the Moms Wear Capes, and what would you help them identify or put their finger on to stand in truth to their highest selves?
Thank you for that question. My core message now, after doing this work for 30 years, is feed mama first.
I love it. It's almost like the airplane where you put your own life.
Yeah. Yes. So we don't value the archetypal feminine in our culture the way it deserves to be valued. And you can see that in those who do the caring and those who do the nourishing generally are the least paid, the least valued.
Yes.
And so women, being no fools, 30, 40 years ago were like, oh, wait a minute, I'm gonna go get a job, I'm gonna go make my own money, I'm gonna get my own power, which works on some level, but then who's gonna do the caring work? We end up outsourcing the caring. We have to hire somebody to raise our children, to cook our food. And you can see a lot of the anxiety and depression that so many people experience today. If you look beneath it, it's the caring is missing from society. Who used to do the caring? It was the archetypal mom, which wasn't valued. Gloria Steinem has said that most women are one man away from poverty. I haven't looked at the statistics to see if that's still true or not. But you know, as a mom, like I'm going to guess you put your son's care over your own.
Yeah, I mean, I would change the phrase in my life to say I'm one more divorce away from poverty, but
yeah, there is a price of motherhood.
100%. When I go to the grocery store, I used to buy special things to make. I love pho and I love bone broth, and I eat traditionally vegetarian, but I do eat some bone broth. And I used to put so many different spices and things in there. And I'm looking at my shopping cart now, and it's hunter, 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 hunter. I don't even think about what I'm going to eat. All I do is focus on this kid. And I end up eating his leftover yogurt for dinner half the time.
Exactly, and so many moms do. In fact, one of the things is I've been health coaching for a long time, and one of my sisters was one of my first clients, and I love that because I knew that when I helped her transform her health and well-being, she would eat something different for breakfast because what she was ending up eating were the crusts of Haley's bread.
Yeah.
And it wasn't going to fuel her, wasn't going to allow her to be the kind of mom she wanted to be to Haley, Tyler, and Katrina, and it certainly wasn't going to allow my sister to be the best woman she could be for herself, right? So by nourishing the moms, I feel like I get to help nourish the world.
Oh, that's beautiful. What are other ways that we can nourish our identity, not just as moms, but outside of being a mom as women?
Well, exactly. So taking a look at that, because we cross over from, or many women do, I don't want to say we because I don't have children, but women, once you become a mother, that becomes your identity. And so to look at all the different aspects of your identity, and who are you when you're not mom, and who are you when you're not wife or ex-spouse or whatever role that you happen to be in, or if you're single, like who are you as a woman separate from your children, and carving out that space to take a look at that. And that's where I come back to feed mama first. That if you're responsible for nourishing another person, you have to fill your own cup. Because eventually, if you don't fill your cup, you will run dry.
Yes.
And the people who depend on you will not be able to get any nourishment from a dry well. So it's not just about you nourishing yourself so that you can give more away, but it's nourishing yourself because you deserve it. You need to nourish yourself for yourself and then give away what spills over.
I love that. I just had an unbelievable heart-wrenching experience with a friend, and I said, well, I need this and this and this and this. And then I said, I am such a hypocrite because you need to do you and you need to love you. And at that point, and only that point, can you love me. And that is such an unbelievable place to where we're gripping onto something and we're asking and screaming, love me, as I did in my last marriage. When I let him go and I said, just love yourself, and then you'll be able to love me, and then you'll have that capacity.
Well, exactly. And it's what I think about in terms of the archetypal level or the spiritual level, that if your cup is dry and you're giving away what you don't have, then energetically you're setting up this dynamic where the person is supposed to receive what you don't have for yourself to give. And I ultimately think it ends up creating either other codependent victims or narcissists, because you're setting up this cycle that it's okay to take from someone who doesn't have something to give, like at an archetypal level, at a spiritual level, right? And so that metaphor, even if you will, doesn't work for me. It's like, you are worthy of yourself. You need to fill your own cup. You should feel well nourished so that you can give away what spills over. And I literally think about it in terms of body wisdom, because one of the places, and this goes back to my work as a social justice scholar, you know, all that heady stuff, all the experiments I'd run, but beyond that, beyond the thinking piece, it's like literally living in your body. The site of oppression for women is so much in our own bodies. We're victimized by sexual harassment or sexual assault, and some of the most beautiful things that we can experience in terms of sexuality get stolen from us sometimes. And so being able to experience pleasure in our bodies, not just the nourishing that comes from food and drink and all that, but also the nourishing that comes from exotic touch and erotic touch and all of that, feeling comfortable in our bodies is our birthright. Oh,
I'm going to create a beautiful meme with that phrase on it. Now, so I wanted to talk to you about feminism, but I would also like to segue and maybe switch gears and talk about fucking.
Yes, oh, please. Oh, did I say that?
Why don't you discuss sexuality with us? Because when I met you, that's the first thing you heard me talking about Moms Wear Capes with Sarah Gustafson, who's an awesome mistress of all things body and spiritual and mind. She's actually very scientific. And you heard me talk about moms wear capes, and you walked up to our table at Austin Java and you said, I might have something to add. And the first thing I said, I'm looking for someone to talk about sex. And you're like, I'm your girl. So tell me a little bit about what you have to share. Although I'm sure you have hours and hours and hours to share, but tell me a little bit about what you can share with us today about sexuality and how important it is and how we can emerge out of really the coma that we all get into. I know after I had my child, I was completely in a sexual coma.
Wow. Yeah, of course. Well, we have this thing in our culture called MILFs, right? Moms I'd like to fuck. And the thing I want to point out about the subtype of MILF is that the idea of moms doesn't include sexuality. We wouldn't need a subtype of moms I'd like to fuck if the regular idea of moms were somebody I'd like to fuck. Do you get what I'm getting at?
What an amazing analogy.
Right, because there's the mom stuff, and then there's the moms I'd like to fuck, which is the subtype, and you never change the stereotype of mom.
So the archetype of mom is looked at someone I don't want to fuck.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And that's why you have the subtype of the exception to the rule. And so that's one way stereotypes end up perpetuating themselves, is that anybody who doesn't fit the standard, they get subtyped into a different category, which prevents the overall category from being changed. And now you can see me going back into the thoughts and the science behind it, rather than like living in your body, because where are we in our culture that allows for women to really love amazing, incredible sex? How can you stand in your sexuality and own it if the broader view in our culture denies open and free expression of sexuality?
And I think a lot of it is shame.
Exactly. And then the depictions that we see in our culture are often negative or pornographic or ugly or not enticing to women. And so if a woman comes out embracing sexuality, then she gets slut shamed. And that costs you in many different ways. It's kind of hard to summarize this really quickly in a brief interview, but these are some of the high points that a lot of us have to experience. And so
I love that you're bringing this up. My first and only real sexual experience since my divorce, I kind of hooked up with a friend, which is wonderful, and it's such a great way to deepen friendships, I think. And I thanked him, which must have been very weird for him, for helping me see God that night.
Yes.
And I really felt like I got so much closer to God through this open, loving self-expression with this man.
Okay, I have to interrupt just really quick, because that's what's missing, right? We have the holy and we have the fucking, but we broke apart the holy fuck. And that's what we all want, I think.
So how can we get there? I can tell you how I got there, but it might be a little awkward because my son will watch this someday.
Right, well, doesn't that say something about the open expression of sexuality? Yeah. You know, and when my sister took her oldest daughter to the pediatrician, at 11, the pediatrician warned her about date rape drugs at 11. Welcome to sexuality, right? So I got this from the point of view of the girls, right? I grew up with 3 sisters and I've got 3 nieces. And then I watched my nephew come of age, and my boyfriend has 2 sons. And so watching these amazing young men come of age, where's their enlightened sexuality, right? Like I can speak to it from the point of view of emerging womanhood. What about emerging manhood? Where do these beautiful young men learn that their penis is not a weapon? Where do they learn to be Thor or Aragorn or whatever archetype that they want to aspire to? Where are the images of, and I use the word divine masculinity.
I'm down.
To try to distinguish it quickly from just being a strong man or whatever. We can debunk all of that. It takes a lot of time to debunk some of this stuff because these are the cultural stereotypes, and so we need a lot more language around that. But my point here is to step into something that looks like enlightened sexuality, not the pornographic sexuality that seems to be all over the culture, that there's other ways of looking at sex and sexuality. There's a lot of wonderful people doing a lot of amazing work. And I guess to like kind of hit one point mainly is your body is extraordinary and exquisite, and you can experience this amazing pleasure, and you have to know that, and then you can seek out lots of different ways of finding what that means to you. You know, what works for one person doesn't work for another, and no matter what your past has been, no matter what your, I lost my virginity to date rape. I was abducted at knife point by a psychopathic rapist. So those are much longer stories. So I know what it's like to be through sexual trauma. And I'm not going to let those experiences or those horrible men keep me from having my own enlightened sexuality.
You know, sexual trauma to me was probably marriage, and I say that tongue in cheek, but one of my favorite quotes was Zsa Zsa Gabor. She said, "Sex, I don't know anything about it. I've always been married." And
yes. Have you seen Esther Perel's work, Mating in Captivity?
not yet. I've heard of it though. I probably need to read it.
Well, that's what happens, right? The eroticism that happens when you first meet somebody or when you get to know them and you date or whatever, and then all of a sudden when you end up in domesticity, there's really nothing very sexy about domesticity.
No.
Unless you create it. Like the default conversation is that's where you go to get safety, not where you go to get adventure. And Esther Perel talks about that in her book. Her TED Talk is the fastest way to access this. And then she's on a bunch of podcasts I've seen recently.
Well, and I think that's why A Doll's House has become one of the longest running and most widely like worldwide audience of any theatrical piece of all time. Because women largely feel like they're in a gilded cage when they're married. So we're talking right now, our audience, there are an enormous amount of women who maybe they've married their high school sweethearts, or maybe like me, they marry perfect strangers and have an amazing sexual experience. And then, even then, you get married and why does stuff seem to fizzle? How can we get that fizzle back, even if it's, God, once a month? It doesn't have to be every night. But how can we regain that fizzle, because we all want it in the depths of our beings?
Right. And Esther Perel's got the whole book on that, right? How do we do that? How do we create adventure and exotic experiences and erotic experiences? Can we want what we already have? I mean, that's the whole topic of her book. Honestly, I didn't know how to do that when I was married. And so when I partnered with the man that I am now with, I was really clear with him. We will do two things in our relationship. We will have sex and we will get ready to have sex. We will fuck. That's what I want to do. I want to fuck and I want to get ready to fuck. Our entire life is about experiencing what is possible in the divine realm of sexuality. That's all I want from you. I don't want to be married to my best friend. I don't want us to be best friends. I have plenty of friends. I want a lover. And so we began our relationship with that foundation. And so that's what we do. We call it Start With Sex. The online course that I offer is called Start With Sex. So I know how to start with sex, and then how to invigorate or reinvigorate marriages where that's lost. That comes kind of next. And the first place I'd say to go look is Esther Perel's work.